I really want today to introduce you to DAI Capital. How many people here have heard of DAI Capital, may I ask? Only a couple of hands, that's why I'm here. I'm here to talk about DAI Capital and why I've joined it in my 70s, the last stage of my career. And I'd like to tell you about 2 or 3 examples of impact investment that DAI is involved in, and I'm very pleased to be a part of. So DAI started in the 1970s. It's a global development company. It has nearly $1 billion of turnover per annum, 835 million. It has 5,000 employees, 2.8 billion of forward sold contracts with over 200 active projects. It's a massive development assistance company, the second largest in the world to US aid. So it's in the front lines of development. It's employee owned, which is really significant after Steve's presentation. It's about shaping a more livable world with values of integrity, responsibility and global citizenship. Let me pause here for a moment, or just before I do, I'll say the areas that we're in, which are all of the areas that you've been hearing about this morning. But I just want to pause for a moment and just share with you why I joined DAI Capital. So my background is as a lawyer first, and then psychology and business, typical sort of, career, I guess. I had 14 years as a managing partner in strategy in Australia in PwC. But in parallel to that, and I wonder how many of us have had this experience, in parallel to that I've got a fairly reasonably good career. I've got 6 kids, by the way, and 12 grandchildren now, I might add. But I had this career, and then on the other hand, I'm involved in Child Fund, I'm involved in Pathways Foundation. I was chair of Amnesty Council in Australia for several years. I have these two different sort of lives coming together, and I was in PwC and I was approached by a headhunter who said, why don't you come and join a company called ACIL? It was year 2000. ACIL was the largest overseas development assistance company in our region. And you know, I'd never heard of them. Like I asked you, had you heard of DAI? No. Had you heard of ACIL? I don't think you had either. However, I joined them. They were owned 51% by private equity. That I didn't know until the time came when I tried to sell them. Anyway, it's 2002 and we're looking for a change for ACIL Australia, which is a large development assistance company with one client at the Australian government at that time. And I'm still running my parallel lives, but DAI came and visited us and said, we'd like to buy you. And so I started a process for our private equity company that I realised had bought 51% of our company in order to get a return. I didn't understand that until that point. Anyway, we ran down a process where we talked to DAI about joining and becoming an international firm. And as well as that, I was talking to a company called Cardno, which had 3,000 clients. We had one client, remember? They had 3,000 clients, and they were an organisation that was doing small-scale engineering stuff and a little bit of overseas development. Well, we went through the discussions with both of them, and then we listed with Cardno, and we went from being a 70 million company between us to a 1 billion company in a few years. A great life experience. However, I missed out on joining DAI because we were in discussions with them and they moved back into being an employee-owned company and continued their journey. I then did 15, after I got sacked as CEO, which you do, by the way, in listed companies. I learnt that as well. After 5 years, you do your time. And then I went into M&A and was involved in a number of large transactions of international development companies. So I did bring together the world of doing good and making profit, because I believe it absolutely can be done. Let me share with you, if I may, a few of the... So we joined DAI a year ago, and these are just a few of the projects. I just want to share a couple of projects and then talk about 3 in particular. I wonder how many of you know about the Australian dilemma of closing the gap. We have the oldest continual culture in the world in our Aboriginal people in Australia, 65,000 years of direct lineage to our people, and yet there's a gap in health. There's a gap there's an inequality between the Aboriginal people and the Torres Strait Island people. There's an inequality in life expectancy, child mortality. 2 children to 1 die of the one Australian person. 2 Aboriginal Australian people will die before the age of 4. So there's a massive gap a gap that needs to be changed through healthcare, education and employment. So we're luckily involved, deeply luckily involved in two projects, and we're going to be starting a fund maybe this time next year. My Aboriginal partner will come and present on that fund. Steve has already spoken to us about that. So we're raising capital for a vertical access wind turbine company, Aboriginal owned, Indigenous owned, and a major roads company in Western Australia. We're also involved in, outside of the Aboriginal side, we're involved in raising for iron flow battery companies, one in Queensland moving into Indonesia. And then we're involved in a healthcare regenerative health program that I'm going to spend a minute on in my time with you in Bali. And then we're involved in the procurement of $1 billion worth of medical equipment from India to the Philippines. A massive international opportunity that I'm really proud to be a part of. So, as I say, we joined 12 months ago, and we have 3. So, just to explain, DAI, because you've got to come away from this knowing something about DAI. DAI is an international development company that does government programs for USAID, DFAT, UK aid in developing countries. What they've decided to do, and most of the development companies are doing this now, is they're bringing international private sector capital to match and in fact exceed the capital spent by government. So the billions to trillions paradigm. How are we going to meet the United Nations development goals unless we bring in private capital? We must bring in private and public capital in what's called blended capital and impact capital for the future of our planet. One example I'd like to share with you is DAI has managed a USAID Invest program since 2017, mobilising $1.4 billion worth of USAID money for global development, 300 million of that in climate, and more than half of that has been raised in the last 12 months. That's an example of the DAI type of work. I want to go from that extreme to a smaller extreme at the end, which I'll tell you, which is about a coffee company. But let me start and just run through a couple more. We're starting an Asia-Pacific Sustainable Fund. Now, this is alongside, so DAI is invested in 2 funds at the moment. We're investing in a sustainability fund, which I'll talk about in a moment, in this region. But we've also started, DAI started a fund in Ukraine. And the way we've done it is we as DAI have invested $5 million as a general partner, and then the American government is putting in $100 million to back that, and then the plan is to build that out to $1 billion. So $1 billion fund into Ukraine, prepared to go to Ukraine before others do. So DAI has, I mentioned it has about $1 billion worth of revenue. A third of that at the moment is in the Ukraine. So a massive exposure to Ukraine and a belief in Ukraine. And the Sustainability Fund is really smaller than that, but beginning again with an investment from DAI and then seeking both public and private investment. So we're starting with a $30 million fund, and we are investing in 3 organisations to begin with, and we're going to be developing that. I just want to talk about one of those briefly, and that is the plastic recycling, which is the continual recycling. I've just come back from India, where I've been meeting with the medical procurement people, where I learnt some amazing statistics. You probably know all this, but let me try it. Do you know how many plastic bottles are produced each day in the world? 1.3 billion. That's 1 million a minute of plastic bottles. And how many of those plastic bottles are actually recycled and how many go into landfill? I mean, it's shameful. 20% only go into recycling and 80% in the landfill. And that's just plastic bottles. So we're supporting an organisation who has the technology to extract the resin from those plastic bottles in the recycling process that can be then put into home appliances. They're doing 100,000 tonnes a year at the moment. We're wanting to move them towards 1 million tonnes a year. And that's an example of one of our investments. I mentioned sustainable farming is another one. We're doing some work with Myanmar, with the avocado oil business, and then coffee. And I'm going to finish on coffee. I have 4 minutes left, and we're going to talk about coffee in the last minute. My favourite topic, in fact. But before I do, the Bali Regenerative Healthcare Hospital, I wanted to just mention that to you. I launched that this time last year at Emergence in Sydney, and it's using regenerative medicine, which is using your own cells in your body, building your immunity, putting those cells back into your body, and then being a potential cure for cancer, but also a deterrent for cancer. Some amazing research that's been going in that area. And it's also towards equity and access, and where now, because of the soil turning and the beginning of the project for Simpler Health, it is our client, we're in the process now of being invited to do the same in the Philippines, and one of the reasons why I was in India is the same in India. So I will invite you, I'm on booth number 14, by all means come and talk about either of those two, but most importantly, my pet project. Steve mentioned in his kind introduction to me that I'm a serial investor, an angel investor in my 70s, and I'm delighted to have supported Old Quarter Coffee Merchants, which is an organisation that is in Byron Bay in Australia, but they're bringing in coffee beans from ethnic minority farmers in Asia. They're breaking the value chain. This is a young couple who were involved in the company. We backed them with their first capital, and they're now valued at $10 million. They have 50 retail outlets of wholesale clients around the country. But the most important thing, they do fantastic coffee, but they also do really improve the lives of people in the region, ethnic minority farmers and people, and particularly women-owned farmers. So I really, if you're interested in them, we are doing a raising for them at the moment, a small raising for them at the moment. So, coffee break time. You've heard about DAI today. So now when somebody says, do any of you know DAI Capital? There'll be some hands for those that have enjoyed listening. Thank you for indulging me to tell a little of my history and why in my 70s I've decided to have another reinvigoration of life. As you can see, I'm passionate about it. I am taking stem cells, by the way, in Bali, and I do recommend that to you. So doing good, doing well. I hope that you come away today knowing something about the Circular Economy Fund that we're raising, the regenerative medicine in Indonesia, Bali, and Old Quarter Coffee. Please come and talk, and let's work together at shaping a more livable world. Thank you.